Manhattan's Riverside Drive was once lined with palatial mansions, cliffside castles, and manors nestled in an idyllic setting. But what happened? Who built these stunning residences, and where did they go? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are uncovering Riverside's lost mansions. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive into an extra long episode of This House. Riverside Drive, one of Manhattan's most scenic boulevards, owes its inception to a visionary idea from the mid-19th century. In 1865, Central Park Commissioner William R. Martin proposed creating a park along the Hudson River, a concept that gained momentum under the leadership of Commissioner Andrew Haswell Green. By 1873, the renowned landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted, celebrated for his work on Central Park, was brought in to design both Riverside Park and the adjoining avenue. Olmsted's approach to Riverside Drive was both innovative and sensitive to the natural landscape. Instead of a straight boulevard, he envisioned a curving road that harmonized with the area's natural topography, reducing the need for extensive retaining walls and preserving the natural beauty where the cliffs met with the water. Initially named Riverside Avenue, this 100-foot wide thoroughfare featured tree-lined paths for pedestrians and horses, offering a serene escape from the urban hustle and bustle. Olmsted's vision was further refined by his frequent collaborator Calvert Vaux. Together, they introduced picturesque elements to enhance the scenic quality of the drive. Key to their design were the overpasses at 79th and 96th Streets, which ensured seamless connectivity with maintaining the landscape's aesthetic integrity. The construction of Riverside Drive was not without its challenges. The area's rugged terrain required meticulous planning and execution. By 1876, Olmsted had adapted his plans to accommodate a more practical paved road, though he departed the project the following year. Despite this, other designers and engineers carried on his principles, ensuring the drive remained true to his vision. When Riverside Drive officially opened in 1880, it quickly became a favorite route for pedestrians, cyclists, and automobile enthusiasts, but perhaps most notably, it became known for its mansions. The New York Times once said, "In architectural design, richness of decoration, and completeness of details, this structure is calculated to surpass in luxury and magnificence any city home in America, if not the entire world." This quote was describing the residence of Charles Schwab. He was born into poverty and started off as a grocery store clerk before becoming a laborer at a Carnegie steel mill. He quickly rose through the ranks with a natural-born talent for leadership and innovation, and by adulthood, he had become president of U.S. Steel and had amassed a fortune to rival the wealthiest barons of industry. Schwab set out to build a modern home equipped with groundbreaking technology on a scale that would dwarf the mansions along Fifth Avenue. He purchased a lot on Riverside Drive between 73rd Street and 74th Street, where he would build his modern chateau. Schwab's wife, Urania, was not keen to the idea of moving so far away from her friends. She was a socialite who regularly attended balls around Central Park and became worried that she would never see her friends again. But Charles reassured her that their house would be so grand that her friends would not be able to deny an invitation. Over the course of 4 years, the mansion would be completed with construction of the house racking up a grand total of around $3 million, and the furnishings then doubling that price, coming in at the modern-day equivalent of over $200 million. The 75-room mansion was so impressive that Schwab's former boss Andrew Carnegie would say about it, "Have you seen that place of Charlie's? It makes mine look like a shack." The architect of Schwab's mansion would not allow any pre-made materials into the house. Everything being brought in had to be commissioned and custom-made for the home. Over 100 artists, designers, and engineers were brought in to create the finishing details. Even great works of art would be replicated by this crew. The pillars in the house were carved from marble, and mahogany would be brought in from South America to create the wood paneling. He would have a custom chapel built in his house, which was large enough to have an entire orchestra perform for a live audience. He also had a bowling alley installed with a glazed brick pool in the basement with one of the largest, if not the largest in-home gyms to be built to date. Other marvels of the home included a power plant, air conditioning, and 6 elevators. None of these features were common in even the most prominent of homes from the era, making it an ultra-modern house for its time. The Schwabs lived like royalty in the Riverside Chateau until the stock market crash of the Great Depression. Charles' fortune was wiped out overnight, and he desperately tried to sell the house but was unable to find a buyer. Without money to pay his servants, the house became impossible to live in. In 1939, he packed up his bags and moved into a tiny apartment along Park Avenue. The following year, he passed away with nothing more than a few pennies to his name. The abandoned mansion sat empty for many years before it was demolished and replaced by a utilitarian apartment building, ironically bearing the name Schwab House. As acclaimed as Schwab's mansion might have been, it was hardly the only mega mansion to line Riverside Drive. Winding about the tree-lined streets, dozens, if not hundreds of beautiful homes could be found looking out over the river, though these houses all took second stage. Paterno Castle is our next destination, outshining its neighbors and demanding the social spotlight. Charles V. Paterno, originally a medical graduate from Cornell University, turned his focus to real estate after his father's death. Along with his brother Joseph, he took over the Paterno Construction Company, which gained a reputation for producing luxurious, architecturally conservative apartment buildings. By 1905, Paterno had amassed enough wealth to purchase 7.5 acres in the Inwood section of Manhattan. Inspired by a European castle and reminiscent of the Fort Washington area, he commissioned architect John C. Watson to bring his vision of a romantic, Rhineland-like castle to life. Perched 125 feet above the Hudson River, the 4-story castle was clad in white marble for the exterior, a decision that set his castle apart from the other granite structures of the time. The mansion, which stood at approximately 185th Street, featured large towers and an entrance accessible via a 75-foot underground passageway. The castle's design was both innovative and luxurious. The underground passage led guests to a mushroom vault and a wine cellar, creating an enchanting and somewhat mysterious entry. The basement housed a Turkish bath, massage rooms, and a swimming pool fed by pumps from the Hudson River. At 80 feet above street level, the main reception hall opened into various themed rooms, a Louis XV-style parlor, a colonial dining room, and an Asian-inspired library. One of the castle's most unique features was a conservatory with a fireplace. This all-glass, great hall was filled with tropical plants year-round and hosted guests for games of tropical billiards and other Edwardian delights. The second floor housed the bedrooms, each with its own vestibule, a nursery, and a sewing room. And the third floor was dedicated to entertainment, featuring an immense banquet hall and ballroom, built with 20-foot ceilings and balconies offering stunning views of the Hudson River. The roof garden, with its aviary, solarium, and large conservatory, provided a serene retreat for guests. Despite its grandeur, Paterno Castle's existence was relatively short-lived. By the late 1930s, the economic landscape was changing, and Paterno recognized the need to adapt. In 1938, he demolished the castle to make way for the Castle Village apartment complex, which still occupies the site today. This move was driven by the increasing residential development in the area and the demand for modern housing solutions. Although the castle itself no longer stands, several remnants of Paterno's castle remain. The guest house, known locally as the Pumpkin House due to its orange glow at night, still exists. Additionally, the 75-foot retaining wall built to protect Riverside Drive, now safeguarding the Henry Hudson Parkway, is another surviving piece of the estate. These bits of remaining architecture hint at the character of the neighborhood, even if some of the homes that boasted the most character have since been lost, such as the homes of Mr. Bain. In the late 19th century, Samuel Gamble Bain, an Irish-born millionaire, was a true urban pioneer on Riverside Drive. In 1987, he commissioned architect Frank Freeman to design a brick and stone Romanesque revival mansion at 360 Riverside Drive. Bain, a banker and oil industry pioneer, foresaw the potential of this undeveloped area with its stunning Hudson River views. Bain's belief in the area's future was so strong that he began buying up lots on the entire block to the south. In 1890, he sold his original residence for $130,000 and set out to build an even more impressive mansion at 355 Riverside Drive. Bain brought back Freeman to design his new residence, which would become a harmonious yet more grandiose counterpart to his former home. The second house was a masterpiece of Romanesque architecture, featuring a blend of brick and stone with a red-tiled roof. Freeman's design alleviated the often heavy feeling of the Romanesque style with a soaring 4-story corner pavilion, rows of closely grouped openings, and a sweeping southern roofline. Balconies and bays added dimension, while several dormers provided additional character. The massive entrance arch and the squared angles of the corner porch created an interesting architectural juxtaposition. Always keen to the market, Bain sold his mansion to a developer in exchange for a pile of cash and a penthouse apartment at the same address. Back when the neighborhood was overflowing with character, it also had its characters. Along Manhattan's Riverside Drive, where every square inch of real estate is a prized luxury, there once sat a 25-acre equestrian estate daring to defy the concrete jungle. After a long and arduous 14 years of working, CKG Billings decided to retire at the age of 40. He had been the president of the People's Gas, Light and Coke Company in Chicago and owned a controlling interest in the company. Realizing he could still make a fortune without doing any work, he decided to sit back while the money came pouring in. Now retired at the age of 40, CKG was able to pursue his hobbies. He had long been an avid sportsman and had helped to found various athletic clubs. He could now focus all of his time on sports, especially trotting, in which he won several trophies and ribbons. Being an outdoorsman, he began searching for an equestrian property, and to his family's surprise, he thought Manhattan would be the perfect place to move to. At this time, Manhattan wasn't exactly known for its rolling pastures and nature trails. It was the metropolitan heart of America's largest city, a place where the wealthiest barons of industry spent unimaginable sums of money to build mansions with shared walls and no yards. He purchased a city mansion, blending in with high society. Then he purchased 25 seemingly undevelopable acres along the Hudson River in Washington Heights. The site, which was formerly Fort Tryon, consisted of steep, choppy cliffs 250 feet above sea level, one of the highest points on the island. CKG then hired architect Guy Lau and landscape architect Charles Downing Lay to design for him a grand equestrian estate. After 2 long years of regrading the terrain and slow, tedious construction, the first phase of the estate was complete. In 1903, the 25,000 square foot stable complex was finished. Sources vary on the exact number, but most agree there were between 60 and 75 stalls for horses inside. There were also a few bedrooms and a large casino where CKG could entertain friends. To celebrate the monumental achievement, he sent out invitations to a dinner party. It was leaked to the press that guests would be required to sit on a hobby horse all night, and that the entire dinner would become quite the spectacle. As journalists began gathering outside of the front gate, CKG had his party relocated to Sherry's restaurant in town. The restaurant's 4th floor ballroom was filled with hay, and all 36 guests were required to remain seated atop rented horses while dinner was served. News quickly spread about Manhattan's newest, most eccentric millionaire, but CKG was just getting started. Finally, after 5 long years of construction, the cliff had been transformed into a gentle hill, and sitting atop it in the center was a fortress constructed from solid granite blocks. The 25,000 square foot mansion had been designed in the chateau style and faced in limestone. As we rotate about the mansion, we will notice a tower rising 80 feet into the air. The views from the top were said to be unobstructed, and while it was far from the tallest building, it rivaled New York's tallest skyscrapers of the time in height above sea level. The driveway alone took more than 100 men a full year to construct, carving out the granite cliffs and reusing the stone to build retaining walls, including the grand arcade which was dubbed the Roman roadway. Inside, the entire mansion was planned for entertainment, with the fountain room echoing the owner's eccentricities. While waiting for CKG to show us around, we would first take a seat in the reception room, where a full-time musician would play only the current hits on the piano. Next, we will make our way into the living room, clad in rich wood paneling. As we look around, we will find antiques from dozens of countries, and at this point, we might start to believe that CKG is sophisticated, unlike the words we've read about him in the newspapers. But then we hear him hollering for us as he splashes around in the indoor pool, discarding the rigid social standards of the time. As we hear pins crashing in the bowling alley, we start to realize that Tryon Hall is perhaps the most lavish man cave in existence. Though not all of the rooms could be so fun, Mrs. Billings ensured that the mansion had a proper dining room for formal dinners, though the breakfast room, offering panoramic views of New York from the tower, was where CKG chose to bring most of his friends for shared meals. Mrs. Billings, who had the same dining set reproduced, chose to eat her informal meals separately in the conservatory. While we're here, we can peek our heads outside to see the swimming pool carved into the bluff itself and overflowing with water into the terraced garden below. There are no known photos of the stair halls, so let's resume our tour from the 2nd floor stair landing, which has been staged as the library, a true afterthought in the design of the mansion. From here we can make our way into the billiards room, where CKG's trotting trophies are on full display. Nearby we will find the Billings bedroom, where, as customary for the time, they each had their own separate beds. Tryon Hall became the center of New York's social scene amongst the athletic men of high society. What was meant to be a family mansion quickly turned into a boys' club, with Mrs. Billings choosing to spend much of her time at their other properties. By 1917, CKG had had his fun and grew bored of the property. He purchased a 21-room apartment in town and set out to build multiple estates all around the country, but that's a story for another time. Meanwhile, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was building his legacy and was enticed by the opportunity to purchase Tryon Hall. Not only did he buy the Billings mansion, he purchased 2 adjoining estates and merged the land together in the hopes of founding a park. Unfortunately, John Jr. did not have the pull he thought he did in the city, and it was nearly impossible to get the local government on board with the creation of a new park. Nevertheless, he held onto the properties, renting out the house to an acquaintance while he waited for a decision from the city. After 9 years of his tenant renting the mansion, it caught fire. According to the various newspapers of the time, this disaster was of epic proportions. Not only were the hydrants too far away from the house, but the hoses weren't long enough to get within 50 feet of its walls. Firemen had to race down to the river to fetch water in tanks and bring it all the way up the drive. By the next morning, the fire was under control, but the mansion and everything inside of it had been reduced to ash. Among the most grieved incinerated items were 2 paintings by Rembrandt, a handful of European tapestries, and the plans to one day turn the house into a New York history museum. By the following year, Rockefeller had cleaned up the mess and reorganized the grounds with the aid of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Finally, with a finished park, the city was ready to accept Rockefeller's donation. While the mansion no longer exists, you can still find bits and pieces of the estate scattered about Fort Tryon Park, blending into the scenery. One of the other estates which Rockefeller had purchased for this park was known by 2 names. Libby Castle, originally named Woodcliff Castle, was an iconic Gothic Revival mansion perched on the hills near Tryon Hall. Built in 1855 by Augustus C. Richards, an importer, the castle was designed by the renowned architect Alexander Jackson Davis. With its towers and massive stone walls, the castle stood as the most prominent structure on the northern Manhattan skyline for decades. Over the years, the castle changed hands multiple times, each owner adding to its storied history. In 1869, Union Army General Daniel Butterfield purchased Woodcliff Castle. Butterfield, credited with composing the bugle call Taps, owned the castle for less than a month before financial scandal forced him to sell it. The notorious Tammany Hall leader William Boss Tweed was the next owner. Tweed's tenure was also brief, and he never lived in the castle. Instead, he sold it to his son before fleeing to Europe to escape fraud charges. Tweed's downfall began in 1871, and he died in jail in 1878. In 1872, the castle was bought by department store magnate A.T. Stewart. After Stewart's death in 1876, his business partner William Libby acquired the estate. Under Libby's ownership, the castle underwent significant renovations and expansions, once again overseen by its original architect, Alexander Jackson Davis. The castle, now known as Libby Castle, finally became a luxurious year-round residence for the first time since it had been built. William Libby and his wife Elizabeth enjoyed their home until William's death in 1895. The castle remained in the family until around 1905 when it was sold to former New York City Mayor Hugh J. Grant. Grant, the city's first Catholic mayor, maintained the castle's grandeur, which brings us back to 1917, when Rockefeller began acquiring land in the Fort Tryon area, including Libby Castle, to develop into Fort Tryon Park. And as you can probably guess, it was demolished for the park in 1939. Of course, when these grand mansions were built, no one really knew what the neighborhood would someday become. Perhaps none were as modest in their predictions as John H. Matthews. He was known as the Soda Water King and amassed a tremendous fortune through his family's soda water manufacturing business. His grandfather, also named John Matthews, had patented machinery for producing soda water, making the family one of the wealthiest in the industry. By the time Matthews began construction on his Riverside Drive house, he was already a prominent figure in New York's high society. Located at 176 Riverside Drive, his house was an architectural gem in the heart of Manhattan. Designed by the firm of Lamb & Rich, the mansion was completed in 1891 and stood out for its unique shingle style, a bold choice for an urban setting. Unlike many other contemporary city mansions that favor classical and showy styles, this house embraced the rustic charm of shingled surfaces, combined with vibrant shapes, angles, and contrasting materials, and would have been more at home in the middle of an open field than in the center of America's most populated city. His taste in architecture weren't the only thing that set him apart. Unlike many of his contemporaries who indulged in yachting or horse racing, Matthews had a passion for breeding bulldogs. He served as the president of the Bulldog Club, and his dogs were often seen accompanying his daughters on walks. His prized bulldogs, Bathos and Dolly Tester, were considered some of the finest in America. The mansion changed hands several times, with real estate operator Franklin Petit selling it to Mrs. Mary B. Pell in June of 1910. Mary Pell, who owned the neighboring mansion, purchased the property to prevent the construction of an apartment building next door, and lived there until her death in 1913. Despite initial fears that the mansion would be demolished after Mary Pell's death, the house survived until late 1921. On November 5th of that year, the New York Herald reported that Harry Schiff had secured a loan to construct a 13-story apartment building on the site. The new structure, designed by Schwartz and Gross, was completed in 1922 and still stands today, marking the end of an era for the blissfully out-of-place Matthews Mansion. One of the other neighbors who had helped spur the area's initial development was Cyrus Clark. In fact, the development of the Upper West Side into a modern suburb was significantly driven by Cyrus Clark, a man whose vision and persistence earned him the title, the Father of the West Side. After amassing a fortune from his wholesale silk business, Clark turned his attention to real estate development, specifically focusing on the rocky, hilly region of the Upper West Side. His tireless advocacy for infrastructural improvements such as mass transit, sewer lines, and gas street lamps laid the foundation for the area's transformation. In 1870, after studying real estate development in Europe, Clark began purchasing undeveloped land on the Upper West Side. He played a pivotal role in the establishment of Riverside Drive along Riverside Park. By February of 1884, he co-founded the Citizens West Side Improvement Association, later incorporated as the West End Association in 1889. As its longtime president, Clark's relentless efforts ensured the Upper West Side's growth and prosperity. By 1883, Clark and his family had moved into their new home on the southwest corner of Riverside Drive and 90th Street. Designed by architect Henry F. Kilburn, the mansion was an impressive blend of French Renaissance and Romanesque revival and featured a rough-cut stone facade, a tile-covered hip roof, towers, dormers, and clustered chimneys. Numerous porches capitalized on the location's river breezes and spectacular views. The Clark mansion quickly became a prominent fixture on Riverside Drive. However, by December of 1891, Cyrus Clark and other mansion owners voiced concerns over the maintenance of Riverside Drive, accusing the park commissioners of neglect and allowing nuisances to invade the area. They argued that the commissioners' negligence led to failing property values and threatened legal action to address the construction of unsightly factories along the riverfront. The next owners, the Parsons, would have been affectionately known in today's terms as NIMBYs as well. The Parsons sued to stop the construction of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument because it partially obstructed one of their views through one of their windows. They lost in court and the house changed hands several times, eventually being replaced by yet another apartment building. However, there was another Clark in the neighborhood, one with a more pleasant reputation. In 1896, Elizabeth Clark stood among the wealthiest widows in America. She had married Alfred Corning Clark, heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune in 1869. Together they had 4 sons and managed vast real estate holdings, including the iconic Dakota apartment building. Alfred's untimely death in 1896 left Elizabeth in control of a substantial estate, which she used to further her philanthropic endeavors and develop significant properties in New York City. Her vision for an architectural landmark materialized when she acquired a prime lot at the northeast corner of Riverside Drive and 89th Street. Architect Ernest Flagg was commissioned to design a mansion that would stand out among the finest residences of New York's elite. The result was a stunning 4-story Beaux-Arts-style mansion completed in 1898, featuring red brick and white marble accents. This grand home was described as one of the most striking residences on that beautiful thoroughfare by the Evening World. The mansion's design reflected Elizabeth's preference for understated elegance. The architectural record praised it, stating, "The house is finished front and back, inside and out, with equal care, and the workmanship and appointments are the best that money can buy. Probably no better built house was ever put up." The residence exuded a sense of permanence and dignity befitting of the Clark family's status. Despite its grandeur, the mansion was also a place of personal significance. Elizabeth's marriage to Bishop Potter brought new life to the residence, which became known as the Bishop Potter residence. The couple's social and charitable activities kept the mansion at the center of New York's elite gatherings. Following Elizabeth's passing in 1909, the house was sold to the Barnard family, who maintained its place in society. However, in 1922, the house was sold and eventually replaced by an apartment building. There were a lot of really beautiful homes, full of interesting people, many of whom led amazing lives full of luxury beyond our wildest dreams. And while we could spend years digging up information and photos to piece together Riverside Drive, I'll leave you with one last lost mansion, the Seaman Drake Estate. The Seaman family were early American settlers, tracing their roots back to British Captain John Seaman, who settled in Hempstead, Long Island, in the mid-1600s. One of the most distinguished family members was Dr. Valentine Seaman, who introduced the smallpox vaccine to America in the early 1800s and founded the nation's first nursing school. In 1851, Dr. Seaman's son, John, purchased the land for the estate. The Seaman mansion, with its gleaming white marble facade and ornate cupolas, was a sight to behold. The Italianate villa included numerous outbuildings, all constructed from the same local marble, creating a cohesive and striking aesthetic. The estate was described in 1898 by James Roll Smith as magnificent, with grounds laid out in the Italian villa style, complete with statues, walks, and marble steps flanked by lion statues. Inside, the mansion boasted 30 rooms, including a grand hall extending from front to rear, a richly appointed library with mahogany bookcases and marble bust, and a conservatory filled with exotic plants. The second floor housed a chapel, reflecting the Seaman family's Quaker faith. But as do all things, the estate's grandeur began to fade into the 20th century. In 1905, wealthy contractor Thomas Dwyer purchased the property and used it as his residence and office. Despite his grand plans, the estate slowly declined, and by the 1930s, the once lavish mansion had fallen into disrepair. In 1938, the Seaman mansion was demolished to make way for the Park Terrace Gardens housing complex. However, the iconic marble gatehouse survived, albeit in a state of neglect. Once a grand entrance, it now stands marred by graffiti and crowded by commercial buildings, though in a way, this is poetic. These mansions, once the epitome of luxury, had been reduced to whispers, telling the tale of the ever-changing landscape of New York City, where history and progress constantly intersect. Thank you all for joining me on this tour through Riverside's Lost Mansions. Leave a comment below and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of this house.